Think big, 10x, accumulate hundreds or even thousands of rental units. Leverage, syndicate, and borrow as much money as you can. In other words, go big or go home. The real idea behind it is that the investors with the most cash flow, the most properties, and the most wealth are the ones who are most successful. Well, I've personally found that more is not always better in real estate and business. Instead of more properties, what I really wanted more of was free time. Time to do things like playing basketball in the middle of the day or being present when my kids get off the bus from school. And I also wanted more flexibility. Flexibility to travel the world for months at a time, or flexibility to contribute to my local community and volunteer whether or not I made money from it. To get more of those things, going smaller and simpler is actually the better approach for most of us. Having more properties or a bigger business may make you more money, but it also brings more stress, more hassle, and a lot less free time. So I'm starting a new movement around here at Coach Carson. If you like it, I hope you'll join me. Around here, the small and mighty real estate business that prioritizes lifestyle is the status symbol of choice. And our motto is, go small or go home. If you like that kind of movement, stick around. I'm gonna explain more in the rest of this video. If we haven't met yet, my name is Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and Coach Carson TV is a channel all about helping you to invest in real estate, achieve financial independence, and then do more of what matters, which means to live a rich life. And not only measure success by how much money you have in the bank. Now, I want to say from the start that going big or doing more isn't inherently bad. There are different approaches that work for everyone. But the main point is this: whether you build a huge real estate empire or a tiny one, there are always trade-offs. There are pluses and minuses. But particularly with going big, the trade-offs are not talked about enough. So I want to share a story with you of 3 real estate investors that demonstrate how these trade-offs work. One summer, 3 couples decided to take a 14-day trip to Europe along the Mediterranean coast of Italy, Croatia, and Greece. These same couples had begun investing in real estate 12 years before, and they'd all become successful enough that they could leave their jobs. These couples had also become really good friends as they supported one another and grew and learned together through online real estate communities, perhaps like the one I have in my online course, Real Estate Deal School. On this trip, they each booked rooms on the same small cruise ship. But because they all had different levels of financial success, they made slightly different choices about how much they were comfortable spending on the room on the ship and also on the way they traveled to Europe in the first place. So let me explain a little bit more background information about each couple. The first couple, let's call them Liz and Tom, are in their early 50s. They live in a small town in Missouri, and their kids have just gotten to the age where they're old enough to leave their house and be on their own. Liz and Tom also own 10 single-family houses, which they manage and rent themselves. And when they collect the rent each month, they get about $12,000 total. But then after they pay all of their operating expenses, taxes, insurance, things like that, they're left over with $7,000 per month or $84,000 per year. When Liz and Tom first started investing in real estate, they did like a lot of people. They had to scrape by to find enough money to put down on each property, and they used mortgage debt to buy those properties. But then over time, they worked hard and they saved their money, and they used a technique called the rental debt snowball to pay all the debt off on their properties until they owned them free and clear. Now, if you want to learn more about the rental debt snowball technique, you can see a link in the video description where I have a video explaining all about how that works. But the point here is that when they collect their rent and they pay their expenses, because they have no debt on the properties, most of the $84,000 per year that they get, after paying a little bit of tax, is left over and can be put in their bank account and available to spend. So because Tom and Liz had this rental income coming in, and also because in the back of their mind, they also know they have a 401k, which they'll eventually be able to tap, which is invested in passive index funds in the stock market, they're able to live comfortably. But they also know that they don't have enough to splurge and just go all out on everything. So on this particular trip, they choose to buy the room that doesn't have the window view. It's the most affordable room. And they also choose to use travel reward points on their credit card to pay for their trip over there. But otherwise, they had the exact same meals and the exact same amenities experience as the rest of their friends, and they have a great time on this trip. The second couple, let's call them Tiffany and Darius, are in their early 40s and have school-aged children who are still 12 and 10 years old. They live in New York, but they invest out of state in North Carolina, where they have a 50-unit apartment portfolio that's fully managed by local property managers there in North Carolina. Now for Tiffany and Darius, when they first began investing in real estate, they bought small houses and small duplexes that were what they could afford at the time. But they did well with those, they grew them, the value grew on those properties, and eventually they decided to tap into their equity by selling those properties and doing a technique called a 1031 tax-free exchange, which allowed them to sell the properties and not pay taxes on them and use all that money to buy some small apartment buildings that produced a lot more cash flow. They were also able to refinance those apartment buildings with 30-year fixed financing, which gave them some peace of mind over the long run. And when all was said and done, those properties produced about $10,000 per month net after paying all their expenses, or about $120,000 per year. So Tiffany and Darius do have a little bit more cash flow than Liz and Tom, but they're also in the stage in their life where they're still saving for college for their kids and they're still saving to pay off the mortgage on their home. So they end up booking the exact same type room right next to Liz and Tom, and they also use credit card reward points to pay for the flight for them and for their kids to get over to Europe for this trip. Now the third couple, let's call them Lauren and Mike, are in their late 40s, they live in Nevada, but they own properties all over the country. In fact, they just crossed a threshold of owning over 1,000 rental units. Now Mike and Lauren started a lot like the other two couples by buying smaller properties early on, but they got so good at finding deals and raising money that they decided to go big and use a technique called syndication, which essentially just means pooling money among a lot of partners so that you can buy bigger deals. And it's actually the ultimate form of leverage for Lauren and Mike, because as general partners, the people who put the deal together, they get a cut of every one of these bigger deals. So it leads to more cash flow and more wealth building. And in their case, their portion, even today, is $50,000 per month in cash flow, or $600,000 per year. As you could probably tell, Lauren and Mike's portfolio easily produced a lot more money than the other two couples on the trip. Because of that, it was easy for them to afford paying for the nicest room on this small cruise ship, so the penthouse with a view, and they're also able to fly first class from the United States over to Europe to do the trip. Why wouldn't you? Now I shared a lot of details about these couples because I wanted to show there's different approaches and different valid ways to invest in real estate that all can accomplish financial goals. And I also wanted to show that they made the appropriate decisions based on their financial situation, and they all still enjoyed this trip and had a good time together. But the story's not over. By the end of the trip, things actually got even more interesting. Now, on the last night of their trip, they're sitting around the table eating dinner, and Liz and Tom proposed to the group and said, "This has been such a fun trip. Why don't we just extend it? Why don't we do even more?" And for them, they had looked at their own schedule. They had their 10 rental properties, but with a small portfolio, they typically spent 30 to 60 minutes a week on their real estate portfolio. They could do most of that remotely because their tenants paid online. Their tenants had a list of contractors to call if they had some kind of plumbing issue. And for the most part, unless there was a vacancy, they didn't have a lot to do with their rental properties. And even if there is a vacancy, they own these properties free and clear. And if they had to let a property sit vacant for 30 days, it wasn't a big deal. So for them, extending the trip for another 2 weeks was a no-brainer. They said, let's do it. Now, Tiffany and Darius were also excited about the opportunity. They had to call home and delay or cancel a few events they had in their community or at their church, but their kids were super excited about this. They didn't have any school, and they saw this as an educational experience as a family, and they said, let's do it. Their real estate portfolio was by and large managed by the local property manager. So because there were no financing issues looming, no major remodels, they were pretty much passive and very automated, and they could certainly do everything they needed to do remotely on their portfolio. So they also said, let's do it, let's extend the trip. And so the third couple, Lauren and Mike, were also excited about the opportunity. And of course, they could easily afford to extend the trip. But they actually had a lot of projects going on back at home in their growing business. For one, they had systematized and automated a lot of their business, and they hired other people to do things. But they have a property manager who they had recently had to fire, and so they needed to find a replacement as soon as possible. That was their role as the general partner on some of these deals. And because they had a bad property manager who normally did things, they now had to step in and go find another one. So that was one urgent issue they had to deal with. They'd also recently bought a larger apartment complex, which was going to need a major remodel. And so they had a competent general contractor handling a lot of the day-to-day work, but they did need to be on site to make some decisions about what to do, some design decisions, some materials decisions. And so they needed to make some trips to meet with that contractor. And then third, although they had built a lot of systems, they had recently hired some new staff members. They had a bookkeeper, they also had an acquisitions manager who was needing some more training and some more learning to implement some of their systems. So for all those reasons in this growing business, Lauren and Mike regretfully had to decline, and they headed on back to the United States. Now, the point of this story isn't to say that the business that Lauren and Mike built is a bad business. As we've already said, in many respects, it is a very successful business. They are producing a lot of cash flow, and it's not to say that they couldn't eventually solve some of these problems that they're dealing with. But in my experience, as someone who's operated a fast-growing, larger business, and who's also operated smaller, simpler businesses, is that it's not easy to manage that larger, faster-growing business. I kind of think about it like Frankenstein, you know, that monster at Halloween who a scientist created, but then it has a life of its own, and you originally thought you had control of it, but bigger businesses can become a monster on their own if you're not careful. It is not easy to manage that monster. And I actually think about it in the form of a graph. So if you look at a graph and you say on the bottom, the horizontal axis is how much time and hassle you have to invest in a business. And on the vertical, the y-axis of the graph is how much money you get from that business. Well, you can look at it in this life cycle of a business. And everybody, whether you have a small business or a big one, when you first start, there's a really steep learning curve. And you can think about that as the danger zone. That's where the Frankenstein monster can really jump out. That if you're not careful, you're using more leverage, you're taking more risk, you're investing more time. This is the danger zone where it's really difficult as an entrepreneur, where a lot of people fail, or a lot of people give up. But if you get over that hump, you get to this place called a sweet spot for your business, where you've grown enough, you've increased the cash flow of your business, you've created some systems, maybe you've hired some people to help you out, and you actually gain some of your time back while also making more money. But what a lot of us choose to do is then go for some more cycles. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's the way entrepreneurship works. You go up and you go up again and you go up again. But remember, there's always that danger zone, that Frankenstein monster, which can come back and get you. And the larger you get and the bigger your business gets and the more pieces you have to run, the more difficult it can be to manage. And so that's really the point of this, is understanding the trade-offs of a small business versus a large business. And also the underlying point here is trying to find that sweet spot, a place where you find what's enough for you financially. Back in my mid-20s, I read an incredible book that's probably my favorite financial book of all time, and it's called Your Money or Your Life. It was written by Vicki Robin and Joe Dominguez. And there are a lot of great ideas in the book that impacted me, but one in particular was this idea about helping you figure out what's enough for you financially. And they did this with a graph called a fulfillment curve. So another graph, and the curve worked like this, is that every dollar you spend, so think about those first few dollars you spend. If you were hungry, you had no food, those first few dollars you spend would bring a lot of happiness and satisfaction, a lot of fulfillment. And then the next few dollars you spent, if they got you a warm shelter, man, even more fulfillment, even more satisfaction. And then if you could get a stable roof over your head, if you could buy a few little luxuries, if you could go on a few trips, those are also satisfying. And you keep going up the curve and having more and more fulfillment. But an interesting thing happens is that the more you spend, you actually start having either flat, it doesn't give you that much more satisfaction, or sometimes even it starts going down and you have less satisfaction. Now, why does that happen? It happens for some practical reasons, is that more money you spend, the more debt you incur, like to pay for a huge house or something, the more you have to work. And sometimes you get trapped to that job, this cycle of earning and spending, earning and spending. It also happens because the more stuff you get, you start worrying about that stuff, and you lack some simplicity and some enjoyment of the things when you have so much clutter in your life. And so it's a different place for everyone. This is not judging, saying that's too much or that's too little. But the important point here is that we all have this fulfillment curve, and it's an important step as a real estate investor and as someone looking to achieve financial independence to ask yourself the question, how much is enough? And stories like this with the 3 different couples is not meant to say one is better than the other, but you have to think about what is enough for you, because there's a trade-off. The bigger you get, the more complex you get, there are trade-offs and hassles and risks that you take the larger you get. Now, I'm sure I'm getting some pushback and so a little bit of objection from some of you who say, Chad, I like business. I like growth. Growth itself is fulfilling for me. Why would I want to slow down, keep it small, and try to do this early retirement thing where I sit on a beach and do nothing? That would drive me crazy. I want projects. I want to grow. I want to do these things. My answer is, this is not an either-or proposition. But particularly with your finances and with your business, it can be smart to take some chips off the table, to use a poker metaphor. That if you continue to grow and grow quickly and always add more leverage and always take more risk, you're sacrificing the very financial foundation that you built. So the idea might be to continue growing, but to do it more in an organic way, in a lower risk way. Even if you look at Warren Buffett and some of the famous financial people who had long staying power, people like Buffett say, I'm never gonna sacrifice my financial foundation by taking extra risk just to get a few extra percentage returns for my portfolio. That would be crazy. Once you've built all this up, who wants to slide back down the mountain after you've done such a good job building up to the point you are right now? So it's a matter of risk and how you grow. That's one part of it. The other part though is a very personal challenge. And I found for myself at least, is that this is an opportunity to ask yourself, how can I grow in different ways in my life? And it's kind of like when you were 16, 17, 18 years old, and you ask yourself the question, what am I gonna do when I grow up? Who am I gonna be? And this is a question that gets kind of squashed for a lot of us. When we get into the adult world, we start working, we start getting in the grind of our job or of our business, we lose that imagination about what you can do later on in your life, other possibilities. And I'll tell you a brief story for me, happened in 2009. So we were in the middle of the Great Recession, and I started reading some of these ideas like in the 4-Hour Work Week about taking many retirements, taking a break. I'm a type A, go, grow type mentality. And my wife and I decided to take a 4-month mini retirement where we went to Spain, first of all, and then we went to South America, took our backpacks, really simple trip. I learned to speak Spanish really well. It was just a life-changing trip. But I can remember I was so uptight. I was so like almost just going through withdrawal of being able to grow and do my business, and I was just go, 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 go. It was about 6 weeks into the trip, and I remember we were sitting on this little coastal town on the Mediterranean coast of Spain. It's called Cadaqués, just picturesque, rocky shore. And my wife and I were just taking these slow days, and we were sitting out on this little bench. I was reading a book. She was taking a nap. We just sat there for like hours, and we watched the sunset over this little bay. Eventually we saw this big shooting star across the bay. It was just kind of this magical day, but it took to that time, 6 weeks into the trip, when I could physically feel this knot in my chest just kind of untying, and me just taking a deep breath and relaxing. It was a pretty amazing experience to have that kind of tension unwind. But the other thing it did for me was I couldn't believe that I had such a one-track mind, and I'd forgotten about a lot of the other aspirations that I had in my life, some of which were business-oriented, like for example, this business of teaching people and learning and sharing online. That's very fulfilling, and it's something I've done a lot of since that time. But also some other things like working in my community. I really wanted to make a difference, and I was interested in some other topics that I wanted to learn about, some of which were very impractical. I'm doing a lot of urban planning and building trails and trying to make it easier to walk and bike and have alternative transportation networks. So that might be totally uninteresting to you, but it was something I was interested in that I could explore. And there are other things like that, and I know you have things like that as well. And so the creativity and the imagination of keeping things small gives you space in your life, gives you time and flexibility to explore some of those things for yourself. Now I want to bring this all the way back to how we started this video with the motto here at Coach Carson and the movement that I'm trying to build, which is go small or go home. Now that doesn't mean that going big is bad, but it does mean that a small and mighty real estate business can be enough. It can satisfy every financial need that you could ever need in your life, while also giving you the maximum amount of time and flexibility to live a rich life. Now for the most important part of this video, I want to ask the question to you. If money were no object, if you had all of your financial concerns solved, what would you spend your time doing? In other words, what matters? What are your priorities? Perhaps would you go part-time with your current job, spend less time working and more time on other hobbies or with your family? Would perhaps you change careers completely and go into something that's impractical, maybe that makes less money, but that's really fulfilling for you? Would you travel? Would you spend time maybe on a hobby that you've put off for a long time? Maybe you want to brew beer in your garage and do craft beer brewery, or maybe you have a local cause, a local impact that really needs to be done and somebody needs to do it and you're the one to do that. There's so many possibilities out there, including just taking care of your own personal health. Maybe you exercise more. Maybe you have slow meals at home that you cook or you and your spouse cook that makes you more healthy. Maybe you take more walks. Maybe you go hiking more. Use your imagination. There are unique things for you in your life that you can spend more time on, and this is the opportunity to brainstorm about those things and think, what would I do if money were no object? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below with any of your thoughts on what matters to you, what you would spend your time doing, or any other feedback you have on this video. And if you're new to the channel, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the little bell so you don't miss anything. I have new podcasts that come out every Monday and new videos just like this that come out every Friday, and I'd love to have you stick around for more. And if you like this video, I think you'll also like my next video, which is called Why I Sold Out for Money, which is all about the early years of my own real estate investing and telling you the story of how I got started and started changing my philosophy about building businesses just like I'm talking about today, small and simple and mighty real estate investing businesses. You've been watching Coach Carson TV. My name is Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and this is a channel all about helping you invest in real estate, achieve financial independence, and do more of what matters. See you next time.